The Wyoming wind howled like a wounded beast as Willow Crawford struggled to stay awake, her thin cotton dress offering little protection against the biting cold. She had been traveling for days, seeking refuge from a past that haunted her steps, but exhaustion had finally claimed its victory in this desolate corner of Sweetwater, Wyoming territory. Her back pressed against the weathered exterior wall of the general store, her knees pulled tight to her chest as she fought against the seductive pull of sleep in the gathering twilight of 1876. Clint Yancy had seen her earlier that day, a bedraggled figure stumbling into town aboard a horse that looked as spent as its rider. He'd watched from the window of his small ranch office as she'd tied her mount outside the general store, disappearing inside only to emerge empty-handed. Now, making his evening rounds, he found her there, a woman barely clinging to consciousness, her honey-brown hair falling loose from what had once been a tidy bun, her face smudged with the dust of long travel. "Madam," Clint called softly, approaching with caution. When she didn't respond, he noticed her breathing had steadied in slumber despite her uncomfortable position. Something about her vulnerability against the rough-hewn planks of the building stirred something deep within him. Perhaps it was the memory of his own sister, lost to the harsh realities of frontier life years ago. Or perhaps it was simply human decency that compelled him to act. Without further hesitation, he turned and strode purposefully toward the hotel where he kept a room. Minutes later, he returned with a woolen blanket and a feather pillow from his own bed. "This ain't proper, but it's Christian," he murmured to himself as he carefully slipped the pillow between her head and the wall, then draped the blanket over her slumped form. His weathered hands, calloused from years of ranch work, moved with surprising gentleness as he tucked the blanket around her shoulders. Willow stirred but didn't wake. In the fading light, Clint could see the delicate curve of her jaw, the long lashes that fanned across her cheekbones. A woman alone in Sweetwater was either desperate or dangerous, sometimes both. His instincts, honed by years on the frontier, told him she was the former. He straightened, adjusting his hat as he took a step back. "Sleep well, madam," he whispered. "Reckon tomorrow will bring answers enough." With that, he positioned himself on a nearby bench, determined to keep watch until morning. In these parts, a woman alone was vulnerable to dangers that didn't sleep, and Clint Yancy had never been one to leave the vulnerable unprotected. Dawn broke with a gentle pink glow that belied the harshness of the frontier landscape. Willow's eyes fluttered open, momentary confusion registering on her face as she felt the soft pillow beneath her head and the warm weight of a blanket across her body. She sat upright with a jolt, the blanket falling to her lap as her gaze darted around, finally settling on the tall figure approaching with 2 steaming cups. "Mornin', madam," Clint said, his voice deliberately soft. "Thought you might appreciate some coffee." Willow scrambled to her feet, clutching the blanket as though it were armor. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice hoarse from sleep and thirst. "What do you want?" Clint stopped a respectful distance away, extending one of the cups. "Name's Clint Yancy. I run the Crooked Creek Ranch just outside of town. Don't want nothing except to make sure you're all right. Saw you fall asleep out here last night. Thought you might appreciate some comfort." She eyed the coffee warily, but the aroma was too tempting to resist. After a moment's hesitation, she reached for it, careful to avoid touching his fingers. "Thank you," she said stiffly. I didn't mean to fall asleep out here." "Most folks don't plan on using a building site as a bedchamber," Clint replied with a hint of a smile. "You got a name?" "Willow," she answered after taking a cautious sip. "Willow Crawford. You're a long way from anywhere, Miss Crawford, traveling alone." The wariness returned to her eyes. "I don't see how that's your concern, Mr. Yancy." Clint raised his free hand in a placating gesture. It ain't. Just mackin' conversation. He nodded toward her empty saddlebags visible on her exhausted horse. Looks like you might be needin' supplies. Store won't open for another hour, but Widow Pearson serves a decent breakfast at her boarding house. I'd be happy to. No, Willow interrupted sharply. I don't need charity. Wasn't offerin' any, Clint replied evenly. Just breakfast. A man can buy a lady breakfast without it being charity, can't he? Willow took another sip of coffee, using the moment to study him. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. His clothes were well-worn but clean, and he wore his pistol low on his hip, the mark of a man who knew how to use it. But there was something in his gaze that didn't match the hardened exterior, something that spoke of kindness rarely found in these parts. I have no money to repay you, she finally admitted, hating the vulnerability in her voice. Wasn't asking for repayment either, Clint said. But if it makes you feel better, you can tell me your story over eggs and bacon. Storytelling's fair trade out here. Against her better judgment, Willow found herself nodding. Just breakfast, she agreed, and then I'll be on my way. Clint didn't argue, simply gestured for her to follow him down the dusty main street. As they walked, Willow clutched the blanket around her shoulders, acutely aware of the curious glances from the few early risers of Sweetwater. Widow Pearson's boarding house was a two-story structure painted a fading yellow, with white gingerbread trim that spoke of aspirations beyond the rugged reality of Wyoming territory. Inside, the smell of freshly baked bread and sizzling bacon made Willow's empty stomach clench with hunger. "Mornin', Mrs. Pearson's," Clint called as they entered the dining room where a few other patrons already sat at the scattered tables. "Got room for two more," the widow, a plump woman with steel-gray hair pulled into a severe bun, eyed Willow with undisguised curiosity. "Always room for you, Clint Yancy," she replied. "And your friend?" "Miss Crawford is new to Sweetwater," Clint explained, pulling out a chair for Willow at a small corner table. "Thought she ought to start her stay with the best breakfast in the territory, Mrs. Pearson sniffed but seemed mollified by the compliment. "Coffee's fresh. I'll bring plates directly." Once they were seated, an awkward silence fell between them. Willow stared at her coffee cup, acutely aware of Clint's presence across from her. She'd spent the past year avoiding men's attention, and now here she was, having breakfast with a stranger who'd watched over her while she slept. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "For the pillow and blanket, and for standing guard." Clint looked surprised. "How'd you know I kept watch?" A hint of a smile touched her lips. "I didn't. Not until you just confirmed it." A chuckle rumbled from his chest. "Clever. Guess I walked right into that one." He leaned back as Mrs. Pearson's appeared with two plates piled high with eggs, bacon, and thick slices of bread slathered with butter. "Much obliged, madam," he said with a nod of thanks. They ate in silence for a few minutes, Willow trying to maintain her dignity while fighting the urge to devour the first real meal she'd had in days. Finally, Clint spoke again, his voice casual. "So, what brings you to Sweetwater? Not exactly on the main trail for most folks." Willow carefully set down her fork. "I'm heading to Oregon. I have a cousin there who's offered me a position in her millinery shop." The lie came easily, practiced as it was. Clint's eyes, sharp as a hawk's, studied her face. "That's a mighty long journey for a woman alone. Especially one without supplies." I was robbed," she improvised. 2 days ago, they took everything but my horse and the clothes on my back." "Strange they left the horse," Clint observed mildly. "Good horses are worth more than most folks carry in their pockets." Willow felt color rise in her cheeks. Perhaps they were interrupted before they could take him. Perhaps. Clint took a bite of bacon, chewing thoughtfully. Or perhaps there's another story altogether, one you ain't ready to share with a stranger. Her eyes flashed. You offered breakfast in exchange for a story, Mr. Yancey. You didn't specify it had to be the truth. To her surprise, he laughed, a warm, genuine sound that drew the eyes of the other diners. Fair enough, Miss Crawford, fair enough. He finished his coffee in one long swallow. Tell you what. I got need of someone to help around the ranch house for a spell. My housekeeper's gone to Denver to tend her ailing sister. Cooking, cleaning, mending, nothing improper. Pays $3 a week plus room and board. Willow's heart thumped painfully in her chest. $3 a week would mean food, supplies, maybe even enough saved for a train ticket west in a few months. But the idea of being alone at a ranch with this man, no matter how seemingly kind, set alarm bells ringing in her mind. Your wife wouldn't object to having a strange woman in her home. She asked carefully. No wife to object, Clint answered simply. Never found the right woman willing to put up with a stubborn cowboy and a struggling ranch. Something like sadness flickered in his eyes before he continued. But I got 3 ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse, and the foreman's wife comes by regular. You wouldn't be alone with me if that's your concern. It was her concern, though she hadn't expected him to address it so directly. I don't know the first thing about keeping house on a ranch, she admitted. Can you cook anything besides burnt coffee, mend a tier, sweep a floor? Yes, but then you know enough, he interrupted gently. Look, Miss Crawford, I ain't in the habit of rescuing damsels in distress. But you need work, I need help, and winter's comin' on. Won't be no travelers heading west until spring thaw anyway. He stood, dropping coins on the table to cover their meal. Think on it. I'll be at the general store in an hour. You decide you're interested, meet me there. With that, he tipped his hat and walked out, leaving Willow staring after him, the half-eaten breakfast forgotten before her. For nearly an hour, Willow battled with herself. Every instinct honed by bitter experience told her to take her horse and ride as far from Sweetwater as possible. Yet practical considerations couldn't be ignored. She had no money, few skills that would earn her a decent wage in a frontier town. And as Clint had pointed out, winter was approaching. The Oregon Trail would be impassable within weeks. When she finally entered the general store, Clint was at the counter, discussing an order of fence wire with the shopkeeper. He glanced up as the bell above the door announced her arrival, but made no comment, continuing his business as though her presence was neither surprising nor important. Willow wandered the aisles, fingering bolts of calico she couldn't afford, examining canned goods that made her mouth water. Her pride warred with her empty stomach and nearly empty saddlebags. Miss Crawford, Clint's voice startled her from her thoughts. He stood at the end of the aisle, his expression unreadable. Made your decision, she squared her shoulders. I'll take the position. Until spring, no longer. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Fair enough. He gestured to the shopkeeper. Add whatever the lady needs to my account, Frank. Within reason, mind you. Frank, a balding man with spectacles perched on his nose, nodded. What'll you be needing, miss? I couldn't possibly, Willow began. Consider it an advance on your wages, Clint interrupted. Can't have my housekeeper looking like she just rode through a dust storm. Bad for my reputation. There was enough humor in his tone to take the sting from his words, but Willow still felt the heat of embarrassment on her cheeks. She was acutely aware of her travel-stained dress and disheveled appearance. A dress, she conceded finally, and personal items. Clint nodded, understanding her reluctance to elaborate. Frank's wife handles the ladies' goods in the back room. I'll settle up out here while you get what you need. An hour later, Willow found herself riding alongside Clint Yancy on the road leading out of Sweetwater. Her new purchases were packed in a saddlebag he'd provided, and she wore a simple blue cotton dress that, while not fashionable, was clean and fit well enough. The wind had picked up, carrying the scent of sage and distant snow. "Storm's coming," Clint remarked, glancing at the darkening clouds to the north. "Good thing we'll be home before it hits." Home. The word sounded foreign to Willow's ears. It had been so long since she'd had a place to call by that name. "How far is your ranch?" she asked, partly to distract herself from unwelcome memories. "Another hour's ride," Clint replied. "It ain't much compared to the big spreads further south, but it's good land. Been in my family since before the war." "You fought?" The question escaped before she could consider its propriety. Clint's face grew somber. "Cavalry, Union side, don't talk about it much." "I'm sorry," Willow said softly. "I shouldn't have asked," he shrugged, the gesture dismissing both her apology and the subject. "War's long over. Got more pressing concerns these days, like getting the herd through winter and fixing the roof on the north side of the house before snow flies." They rode in companionable silence after that, the rhythmic clop of hooves against the hard, packed earth creating a soothing backdrop to Willow's thoughts. She studied Clint's profile covertly, noting the straight line of his nose, the firm set of his jaw beneath the shadow of his hat. There was strength there, but not cruelty, a distinction she had learned to recognize all too well. The Crooked Creek Ranch came into view as they crested a gentle rise. A sturdy two-story farmhouse of weathered wood stood at the center of a cluster of outbuildings. A corral held several horses, and beyond, Willow could make out the darker shapes of cattle grazing on the rolling grassland that stretched toward distant mountains. "It's beautiful," she said, genuinely surprised by the well-kept appearance of the place. Clint's expression softened with evident pride. "Been working on it since I came back from the war. Pa died while I was away. Ma held on long enough to see me home, then followed him within the year." He pointed to a small fenced area beneath a gnarled cottonwood tree. "They're resting over there, watching over things still." As they approached the house, a lanky young man emerged from the barn, raising a hand in greeting. "That's Elijah, my foreman," Clint explained. "Good man, married to an even better woman. Sarah's likely got dinner started already. She's been helping out since Mrs. Finch left for Denver. What will they think of?" Willow struggled to articulate her concern. Clint glanced at her, understanding dawning in his eyes. "They'll think I hired a housekeeper, which is the truth. Folks round here know me well enough not to assume otherwise." His tone grew serious. "Your reputation's safe at Crooked Creek, Miss Crawford. You have my word on that." Somehow, Willow believed him. As they dismounted in front of the house, a pretty woman with a toddler on her hip stepped onto the porch, her curious gaze taking in Willow's presence. "Sarah, this is Miss Willow Crawford," Clint said by way of introduction. "She'll be taking over for Mrs. Finch until spring." Sarah's face brightened. "Thank the Lord. I've been trying to keep up with the house and the baby and help Elijah with harvest all at once. Thought I might collapse from the effort." She shifted the child to her other hip and extended her free hand. "Welcome to Crooked Creek, Miss Crawford." "Please call me Willow," she replied, taken aback by the genuine warmth of the greeting. "Only if you'll call me Sarah." The young woman turned to Clint. "Dinner's nearly ready. I've made enough for everyone, figuring you'd be bringing the new housekeeper back today." Clint raised an eyebrow. "Mighty confident of my persuasive abilities, weren't you?" Sarah laughed, a merry sound that made her son giggle in response. "No, just confident that any woman with sense would take a position at Crooked Creek over whatever Sweetwater might offer." She winked at Willow. "The men work hard, but they're decent, and the food's plentiful. What more could a girl ask for?" What indeed, Willow thought as she followed them inside. The interior of the house was surprisingly comfortable, with solid furniture that spoke of quality rather than ostentation. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting a warm glow over the main room that served as both parlor and dining area. Through an open doorway, Willow could see a large kitchen where a pot bubbled on the iron stove. "I'll show you to your room so you can freshen up before dinner," Sarah offered, handing the toddler to Clint, who accepted the child with practiced ease. "Thomas, be good for Uncle Clint." The little boy beamed up at Clint, reaching for the cowboy's hat with pudgy fingers. "Unca sin," he exclaimed, his attempt at the name making Willow smile despite herself. As Sarah led her upstairs, Willow couldn't help but glance back at the tableau of the rugged cowboy cradling the child with such natural affection. It was an image that defied her expectations of the frontier men she'd encountered thus far, men who viewed tenderness as weakness and children as burdens. "Here we are," Sarah announced, opening a door to a small but tidy bedroom. A single window offered a view of the distant mountains, and a narrow bed covered with a colorful quilt stood against one wall. A washstand with a porcelain basin and pitcher occupied another corner, while a simple wooden wardrobe completed the furnishings. "It's not fancy," Sarah continued apologetically, "but it's clean and private. The men aren't allowed upstairs, and Clint's room is downstairs off the study, so you'll have this floor to yourself most times." "It's lovely," Willow said honestly. After months of sleeping in barns, under wagons, or against walls, the prospect of a real bed, her own bed, seemed like unimaginable luxury. Sarah smiled, pleased by the response. "I'll leave you to settle in. Dinner's in about 20 minutes. Don't worry about helping tonight, first day and all. Tomorrow I'll show you around the kitchen and explain how things run here." She paused at the door. "Clint's a good man, you know, the best I've known besides my Elijah. Whatever's brought you here, whatever you're running from, you're safe now." Before Willow could respond to this unexpected insight, Sarah was gone, her footsteps receding down the hallway. Left alone, Willow sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. 24 hours ago, she'd been cold, hungry, and hopeless, sleeping against a wall in a strange town. Now she had a job, a roof over her head, and the unexpected kindness of strangers. It was too much to process, too dangerous to trust. Yet as she washed the travel dust from her face and hands, combed her hair into a neater arrangement, and changed into the plain but respectable dress she'd purchased in town, Willow couldn't deny the tentative flutter of hope in her chest. For tonight, at least, she was safe. Tomorrow's dangers would have to wait until tomorrow. Dinner was a lively affair, with Elijah and the two ranch hands brothers named David and Daniel Turner regaling the table with tales of their day's work. Clint sat at the head of the table, occasionally contributing to the conversation, but mostly observing with quiet satisfaction, as his small household enjoyed the excellent meal Sarah had prepared. Willow, seated between Sarah and Daniel, the younger of the Turner brothers, found herself drawn into the camaraderie despite her natural reticence. Daniel, a freckle-faced young man barely out of his teens, seemed determined to impress her with stories of his prowess with horses. "I can break the wildest Mustang in 3 days flat," he boasted, reaching for another helping of potatoes. "Even Clint says I've got the touch." "What Clint says," the rancher interjected dryly, "is that you do better to spend less time showing off and more time mending that fence line in the south pasture." The good-natured ribbing continued throughout the meal, and Willow marveled at the easy relationships among these people who worked and lived together. It was nothing like the tense, fearful household she'd fled from months ago. After dinner, when the men had retired to the bunkhouse, and Sarah had taken a sleepy Thomas home to the foreman's cabin nearby, Willow found herself alone with Clint. She began clearing the table, grateful for the task that allowed her to avoid his gaze. "You don't need to do that tonight," Clint said from his position by the fire where he was lighting his pipe. "Sarah meant it about giving you a day to settle in." "I don't mind," Willow replied, stacking plates. "Keeps my hands busy." Clint studied her for a moment, then nodded as though she'd confirmed something he'd suspected. "Running from something bad enough that idle hands are dangerous, is it?" When she stiffened, he added gently, "Don't need to tell me what or who. Just know that whatever's chasing you isn't likely to find you here." Willow carried the dishes to the kitchen, using the moment to compose herself. When she returned, Clint had moved to his desk in the corner of the room, where he was reviewing what appeared to be ledger books. "Your duties will start tomorrow," he said without looking up. "Cooking for the men breakfast and dinner. Lunch is usually taken in the field, cleaning the house, laundry once a week, mending as needed." He glanced up then. "Can you read and write?" Surprised by the question, Willow nodded. "Yes, my father insisted on education for all his children." "Good. Then you can help with the correspondence and bookkeeping if you've a mind to. Mrs. Finch couldn't abide numbers, and my hand with a pen isn't what it could be." "I'd be glad to help," Willow said, genuinely pleased by the prospect of work that would engage her mind as well as her hands. Clint closed the ledger and stood, stretching in a way that revealed the lean strength of his tall frame. "It's been a long day. I expect you're tired." "Don't worry about rising early tomorrow. Sarah will be by to help with breakfast. After that, the house is yours to run as you see fit." "Thank you, Mr. Yancy," Willow said formally, "for everything." He waved away her gratitude. "Clint will do. Mr. Yancy makes me look for my father." A shadow crossed his face at the mention of his father, but he shook it off with a smile that transformed his features. "Sleep well, Miss Crawford. Tomorrow's soon enough to start earning that $3 a week." As Willow climbed the stairs to her room, she found herself wondering what other expressions that usually somber face might reveal. It was a dangerous line of thought, one she quickly suppressed. Clint Yancy might be different from other men she'd known, but attachment of any kind was a luxury she couldn't afford, not when spring would see her moving on, continuing her journey to where? She realized with a start that she had no destination in mind beyond, away. Perhaps that could change with winter's respite. Perhaps by spring, she would have a plan as well as the means to execute it. Sleep came quickly that night, deep and dreamless in the comfort of a real bed with warm blankets, and the knowledge that no one would disturb her rest. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm as natural as the turning of the seasons. Willow rose before dawn each day to prepare breakfast for the men, who arrived with hearty appetites and appreciative comments about her cooking. She spent her mornings cleaning and organizing the house, discovering that while Clint kept a tidy home, there were many small touches that had been neglected since his mother's passing. Afternoons found her at the desk in the corner of the main room, bringing order to the ranch's financial records. Clint was a careful businessman, she discovered, but his system of accounting left much to be desired. Within days, she had implemented a more efficient method of tracking expenses and income, earning a rare compliment from the taciturn rancher. "You've got a head for figures," he remarked one evening as they sat by the fire, she with her mending and he with his pipe. "Better than mine, that's certain." "My father was a banker," Willow replied without thinking, then immediately tensed, realizing she'd revealed more of her past than she'd intended. Clint noticed her discomfort but didn't press. "Explains why you handle the book so well. Mighty fortunate for me." As October gave way to November, the work on the ranch intensified in preparation for winter. Clint and his men spent long days ensuring the herd, was properly positioned in sheltered pastures, repairing outbuildings and stockpiling firewood. Willow, too, found her duties expanding as she helped Sarah preserve the last of the garden's bounty and prepared the house for the cold months ahead. It was during one such task, hanging heavy curtains to block drafts from the windows, that Willow found herself working alongside Clint. He held the ladder steady as she balanced precariously, struggling to secure the curtain rod to its bracket. "Little to the left," he directed, his deep voice steady and calm. "There, that's got it." As Willow descended the ladder, her foot slipped on the third rung. With a startled cry, she tumbled backward, directly into Clint's waiting arms. He caught her easily, strong hands gripping her waist as her back pressed against his chest. For a breathless moment, they remained frozen in that position, the unexpected intimacy of the contact sending a shiver through Willow that had nothing to do with the November chill. Then, with gentle care, Clint set her on her feet, his hands lingering at her waist a heartbeat longer than necessary. "You all right?" he asked, his voice rougher than usual. Willow stepped away quickly, smoothing her skirts to hide the trembling of her hands. "Yes, thank you. Clumsy of me." "Not clumsy, just a bad rung. I'll fix it later." Clint cleared his throat. "Curtain looks good. Place is starting to feel like a proper home again." The simple observation struck Willow with unexpected force. It was true under her care. The ranch house had transformed from a merely functional space to a home. She'd polished the neglected silver that had belonged to Clint's mother, arranged dried flowers in vases around the rooms, and even convinced Clint to move the furniture in the main room to create a more conversational arrangement around the hearth. "I'm glad you approve," she said softly. I've enjoyed making it comfortable." Something flickered in Clint's eyes, a warmth that had been appearing with increasing frequency when he looked at her. "You've done more than that, Willow. You've brought life back to these rooms." He hesitated, then added with deliberate casualness, "The men have noticed too, especially Daniel. Boy can't stop singing your praises." Willow felt her cheeks warm. It was true that the younger Turner brother had been particularly attentive, often finding excuses to linger in the kitchen when she was cooking or offering to help with chores that brought him into the house. "Daniel is very kind," she replied carefully, "but he's hardly more than a boy." "He's 19, Clint said, "old enough to know his own mind." He picked up the tools he'd brought to hang the curtains. "Just thought you should know that his intentions might be heading in a serious direction. Wouldn't want you caught off guard." Before Willow could formulate a response, Clint had left the room, his long strides carrying him quickly to the safety of his workshop. She stared after him, puzzled by the sudden change in his demeanor. Was he warning her away from Daniel, or was there another message beneath his words? The question lingered in her mind as she prepared dinner that evening, distracted enough that she nearly burned the cornbread. When the men gathered around the table, she found herself unusually aware of both Daniel's eager attention and Clint's studied indifference. The first snow came that night, blanketing the ranch in pristine white that glittered beneath the full moon. Willow stood at her bedroom window, watching the transformed landscape with a sense of wonder that transcended her usual wariness. The world looked clean and new, unmarked by human troubles or sorrows. A movement caught her eye, a solitary figure walking from the main house toward the small cemetery beneath the cottonwood tree. Even without being able to see his face, she knew it was Clint. He stood for a long time before the graves of his parents, his head bowed, snow gathering on the brim of his hat and the shoulders of his coat. Something about his solitary vigil touched a place in Willow's heart that she'd thought safely walled away. Without conscious decision, she found herself wrapping a shawl around her nightdress and making her way quietly downstairs and out onto the porch. The cold air bit at her exposed skin, but she barely noticed as she called softly, "Clint." He turned, surprise evident even at a distance. After a moment's hesitation, he walked back toward the house, his boots leaving deep impressions in the unmarked snow. "You should be inside," he said as he approached. "It's bitter cold." "So should you," Willow countered. "I saw you from my window. Are you all right?" Clint's face, illuminated by moonlight reflected off the snow, showed a vulnerability she'd never seen before. "It was on a night like this that my mother died," he said quietly. "First snow of the season. She loved it, said it made the world look like God had given it a fresh start." He glanced toward the graves. "I come out every year on the first snow, tell her about how the ranch is doing. Foolishness, I suppose." "Not foolish at all," Willow said, hugging her shawl tighter. "It's beautiful. She sounds like a remarkable woman." She was. Clint studied Willow's face, his expression softening. "You remind me of her sometimes. The way you've made the house feel like home again." The comparison made her breath catch. "I'm sure she was a far better homemaker than I could ever be." "Different," Clint corrected gently. "Not better. Just different." He seemed to become aware of her shivering then. "Lord, where are my manners? You're freezing out here." Without warning, he shrugged out of his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, enveloping her in its warmth and the scent of him leather, tobacco, and clean pine. "Now you'll be cold," Willow protested weakly, though she clutched the coat gratefully. "I'm accustomed to it," Clint replied with a smile. "Besides, we'd better get inside before you catch your death. What would the ranch do without its housekeeper?" The question, lightly asked, carried an undercurrent that neither of them was prepared to acknowledge. Instead, they walked side by side back to the house, their footprints marking a path together through the unmarred snow. As they reached the porch, Clint hesitated. "Thank you," he said simply. "For coming out, for caring enough to check on me." "Anyone would have," Willow demurred, slipping his coat from her shoulders and holding it out to him. Clint took the coat, his fingers brushing against hers in the exchange. "No, Willow, not anyone. That's what makes you special." Before she could respond, he added, "Good night. Sleep well." She watched him disappear around the side of the house toward his own entrance, her heart beating an unfamiliar rhythm in her chest. It was dangerous, this feeling, dangerous and impossible. Spring would come, and with it, her departure. There could be no future here, no matter what her treacherous heart might wish. Yet as she climbed the stairs back to her room, Willow found herself wondering what it might be like to remain at Crooked Creek not as a housekeeper, but as something more. The thought followed her into dreams filled with snow and moonlight, and a pair of steady blue eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. The days grew shorter as December settled over the Wyoming landscape, bringing with it a bitter cold that penetrated to the bone. The ranch operated at a slower pace during winter, with the men focusing on maintaining the herd's health and ensuring all was in readiness for the spring calving season. Willow found her duties shifting as well. With the house now prepared for winter, she spent more time cooking hearty meals to sustain the men through their cold work, and helping Clint with the increasingly complex bookkeeping that the end of the year demanded. It was during one such session, as they sat together at the desk reviewing the year's profits and losses, that the subject of Christmas arose. "We should order extra supplies from town," Clint remarked, making a note in the ledger. "The men will expect something special for Christmas dinner." Willow looked up from the invoice she was calculating. "When is the last supply run scheduled?" "Week before Christmas, weather permitting." Clint leaned back in his chair, stretching his long legs toward the fire. "I was thinking you might want to go along. Pick out what we need yourself rather than trusting to my judgment." The suggestion took her by surprise. Since arriving at Crooked Creek, she'd not left the ranch once. The idea of returning to town, where someone might recognize her or word might spread of her whereabouts, sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the winter wind howling outside. I don't think that would be wise," she said carefully. Clint's observant gaze missed nothing. "Still worried about whatever you're running from," Willow set down her pen. In the month she'd spent at Crooked Creek, she'd offered no explanation for her circumstances, and Clint had asked for none. It was an unspoken agreement between them her past was her own, to reveal or conceal as she chose. "Yes," she admitted finally. "I'd rather not risk being seen in town." Clint nodded, accepting her decision without further question. "I'll make the trip myself then. But I'd like your list of what's needed for a proper Christmas celebration." A hint of boyish enthusiasm crept into his voice. "It's been years since we've done more than exchange a bottle of whiskey among the men. Might be nice to remember what a real Christmas feels like." The wistful note in his words touched something in Willow. "My mother always made a special breakfast on Christmas morning," she found herself saying. "Cinnamon rolls and spiced cider, and my father would read the Christmas story from the Bible before we opened any gifts." It was the first time she'd voluntarily shared anything about her family, and Clint recognized the significance of the moment. "Sounds like a fine tradition," he said gently. "My mother insisted on decorating with pine boughs and red ribbons, no matter how lean the year had been. Said Christmas deserved to look and smell special, even if the gifts were modest." "We could do that here," Willow suggested, warming to the idea despite herself. "I saw plenty of pine trees on the North Ridge, and I'm sure there's ribbon somewhere in the house." "I'd like that," Clint said, his smile reaching his eyes. "The whole house decked out proper, a special meal, maybe even some small gifts for everyone." He hesitated, then added, "It would mean a lot to the men, to me too." The simple admission, offered with such unguarded sincerity, melted another layer of the ice Willow had built around her heart. "Then we'll have a proper Christmas," she declared with more confidence than she felt. "I'll make a list of everything we need." Over the next 2 weeks, preparations for Christmas transformed the routine of Crooked Creek Ranch. Under Willow's direction, pine boughs were gathered and arranged throughout the house, their fresh scent filling every room. She discovered a box of ornaments in the attic, treasures from Clint's childhood that had been packed away after his mother's death. Together, they hung them on a small pine tree set up in the corner of the main room, each ornament prompting a story from Clint about Christmases past. The men caught the holiday spirit as well, with Daniel and David carving small wooden figures as gifts, and Elijah fashioning a wreath for the front door from twisted vines and pine cones. Even Sarah, busy with preparations for her own family's celebration, found time to help Willow bake cookies and special breads for the holiday feast. 2 days before Christmas, Clint made the promised trip to Sweetwater for supplies. He returned after dark, his wagon laden with provisions and mysterious packages that he forbade anyone to examine. Willow helped him unload the foodstuffs, but was shooed away when it came to the parcels he carried directly to his workshop. "No peeking," he warned with a grin that made him look years younger. "Some things are meant to be surprises." Christmas Eve arrived with another heavy snowfall that blanketed the ranch in deep drifts. By afternoon, it was clear that Sarah, Elijah, and little Thomas would not be able to join them for the evening meal as planned. "It's just as well," Clint remarked as he and Willow stood on the porch, watching the snow continue to fall. "Storm's getting worse. Better they stay safe in their cabin than risk the walk over, even if it's not far." "I hope they have enough food," Willow worried, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Elijah's a careful man. Their pantry's stocked, and there's plenty of firewood." Clint's breath formed white clouds in the frigid air. "We'll save their gifts for when the weather clears." The men from the bunkhouse arrived for dinner just as darkness fell, stomping snow from their boots and exclaiming over the transformation of the house. Daniel's eyes widened as he took in the decorated tree, the garlands of pine, and the table set with the best china Willow had found in the back of the kitchen cupboard. "It's like something from a storybook," he marveled, his youthful face alight with wonder. "Haven't seen anything like this since I was a boy in Ohio." Willow had prepared a feast despite the smaller gathering: roast beef, potatoes, glazed carrots, fresh bread, and a rich plum pudding for dessert. The men ate with appreciative enthusiasm, the conversation flowing easily around the table. Even David, usually the quietest of the group, contributed stories of Christmas celebrations from his childhood. After dinner, they gathered around the fire while Clint read the Christmas story from his mother's Bible, his deep voice giving weight and beauty to the familiar words. Then, to everyone's delight, he produced small gifts for each of them: fine leather gloves for the Turner brothers, a silver watch fob for Elijah, to be delivered when the snow allowed, and for Willow, a beautifully crafted wooden box with a delicate inlay of lighter wood forming a pattern of leaves across the lid. "I made it myself," he explained as she ran her fingers over the smooth surface. "Thought you might need somewhere special to keep your treasures." "It's beautiful," Willow whispered, deeply touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "I've never received anything like it." The evening concluded with cups of hot cider spiced with cinnamon and cloves, a recipe Willow had remembered from her mother's kitchen. As the clock struck 9, the Turner brothers reluctantly took their leave, facing the short but cold walk back to the bunkhouse. "Best Christmas Eve I can remember," Daniel declared as he donned his coat. "Thank you, Miss Crawford. And you too, boss." After they'd gone, Clint and Willow remained by the fire, neither quite ready for the evening to end. The room was illuminated only by the dancing flames and the candles on the tree, casting everything in a warm, golden glow. "I have something for you," Willow said at last, reaching behind the cushion of her chair. "It isn't much, but—" She handed Clint a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with a strand of red yarn. He took it with evident surprise, his fingers brushing against hers in a touch that sent warmth spreading up her arm. "You didn't have to get me anything," he said, genuine emotion roughening his voice. "I wanted to," Willow replied simply. "Open it." Carefully, as though handling something infinitely precious, Clint unwrapped the package to reveal a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue wool. "This must have taken weeks," he said, running his hand over the intricate stitches. "I worked on it in the evenings after you'd gone to bed," Willow admitted. "I noticed your old one was threadbare and with you out in the cold so much." "It's perfect," Clint said, immediately wrapping it around his neck. "Matches my eyes, or so my mother would have said." "She would have been right," Willow agreed softly, then blushed as she realized the implication of her words. A charged silence fell between them, filled with all the things neither had dared to speak aloud during the months of Willow's stay at Crooked Creek. Clint leaned forward in his chair, his expression more vulnerable than she had ever seen it. "Willow," he began, his voice low and earnest, "I know you plan to leave come spring, and I know there are things in your past that you're not ready to share, but these past months, having you here—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "This house hasn't felt like a home since my mother died, not until you came." Willow's heart hammered against her ribs. "Clint," a tremendous crash from outside interrupted whatever she might have said. They both sprang to their feet, as the sound was followed by a strangled cry that could only have come from one of the horses. "Stay here," Clint ordered, already reaching for his coat and the rifle that hung above the door. Could be a mountain lion come down from the high country, looking for easy prey. "Be careful," Willow urged, following him to the door despite his instruction. Clint paused long enough to wrap the new scarf securely around his neck. "Always am," he assured her with a quick smile before disappearing into the swirling snow. Willow stood at the window, straining to see through the darkness and the thick curtain of falling snow. Minutes stretched endlessly as she waited, imagining all manner of disasters: Clint wounded by a predator, lost in the storm, frozen in the merciless cold. When at last the door burst open, Clint staggered in supporting a half-frozen man she'd never seen before. The stranger was barely conscious, his face blue tinged with cold, his clothes sodden and ice-encrusted. "Help me get him to the fire," Clint gasped, his own face reddened from the bitter wind. "He's nearly gone." Together they managed to lower the stranger onto the hearth rug. Willow immediately began removing his frozen outer garments while Clint stoked the fire to blazing intensity. "Found him collapsed against the corral fence," Clint explained between labored breaths. "Must have been the crash we heard. He knocked down part of the rail trying to get to shelter. His horse is in bad shape too. David's taking care of it in the barn." The stranger groaned as warmth began to penetrate his frozen limbs. He was younger than Willow had first thought, perhaps in his mid-20s, with dark hair and features that suggested an education and breeding beyond the typical frontier settler. "Can you hear me, mister?" Clint asked, kneeling beside the man. "You're safe now, at Crooked Creek Ranch." The man's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then sharpening as they took in his surroundings. "Thank God," he whispered through cracked lips. "Thought I was done for." "Not yet, though it was a near thing," Clint replied. "What's your name, friend? What brings you out in such weather?" The stranger struggled to sit up, accepting the cup of hot cider Willow pressed into his trembling hands. "James Harrington," he said after taking a careful sip. "I'm looking for someone. A woman." His gaze, still somewhat clouded with the effects of his ordeal, drifted to Willow, then back to Clint. "My fiancée. She disappeared from St. Louis nearly a year ago. I've been searching ever since." Ice that had nothing to do with the winter storm formed in Willow's veins. She took an involuntary step backward, nearly dropping the pot of cider she still held. Clint's sharp eyes missed nothing. "Your fiancée, you say? What's her name? Perhaps we've heard something that might help you." James Harrington took another sip of cider, color gradually returning to his face. "Her name is Willow Crawford. She's about this tall with honey-brown hair and green eyes. Her father was a prominent banker in St. Louis until his death last winter." Willow felt the room tilt dangerously around her. The pot slipped from her nerveless fingers, crashing to the floor and splattering hot cider across the hearth rug. Both men turned at the sound, and as James Harrington's gaze locked with hers, recognition dawned in his eyes. "Willow," he breathed, struggling to his feet despite his weakness. "My God, it's really you." Clint moved with the swiftness of a man accustomed to danger, positioning himself between Willow and the stranger. "Seems you've found who you're looking for," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "But I'm thinking the lady might not be as pleased by the reunion as you are." James swayed slightly but remained standing. "There's been a terrible misunderstanding," he insisted. "Willow, please, your father's will has been raid. The truth about your inheritance, about everything, it's all come to light. The truth." Willow found her voice at last, though it emerged as barely more than a whisper. "The truth is that you tried to have me committed to an asylum after my father died. The truth is that you forged documents claiming I was mentally unstable so you could control my inheritance." Clint's posture stiffened, his hand moving instinctively to where his pistol would usually hang. "No, that's not," James began, but Willow cut him off. "I heard you discussing it with Dr. Reynolds. You said it would be a simple matter to keep me sedated indefinitely, that no one would question a grieving daughter suffering a nervous collapse after her father's death." The words poured out of her, months of fear and anger finding release at last. "I escaped the night before they were to take me away. I've been running ever since, terrified that you'd find me and finish what you started." James sank back onto the hearth rug, his face ashen. "You don't understand," he said weakly. "It wasn't me. It was your Uncle Richard. He was the one who arranged everything, the false diagnosis, the commitment papers, all of it. I only learned the truth after you disappeared." "My uncle," Willow repeated incredulously. "Why would he, your father's will?" James explained. "He left controlling interest in the bank to you, not to Richard as everyone expected. Your uncle stood to lose everything. He approached me, said you were too fragile to handle such responsibility, that it would be better for everyone if you were looked after. I swear to you, Willow, I never knew his real intentions until it was too late." Clint, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "That's a convenient story, Mr. Harrington. Got any proof to back it up?" James reached with shaking hands for the inside pocket of his jacket, which Willow had draped over a chair to dry. "In my pocket, there are letters. From the attorney handling your father's estate, from the doctor who refused to go along with Richard's plan, even one from your father himself, written before his death." Willow retrieved the jacket and found a waterproof oilskin packet in the inner pocket. Inside, just as James had claimed, were several letters bearing the letterhead of her father's attorney and personal physician. With trembling fingers, she unfolded the first letter and began to read. It was from Mr. Goldsmith, her father's lawyer of many years, expressing concern over her disappearance and confirming that her Uncle Richard had indeed attempted to contest the will through fraudulent claims about her mental state. The second letter was from Dr. Wilson, who had been her father's physician for decades. He categorically denied ever diagnosing her with any form of mental instability and expressed outrage that his name had been connected with such a scheme. The third letter, however, was the one that broke the last of Willow's resistance. It was from her father, dated just days before his death, expressing his love for her and his confidence in her ability to carry on his legacy. He mentioned concerns about her uncle's reaction to the will and urged her to trust James, whom he described as a young man of integrity who loves you truly. "He's in prison now," James said quietly as Willow lowered the letter, tears streaming unchecked down her face. "Your uncle. The fraud was discovered when Mr. Goldsmith began investigating your disappearance. I've been searching for you ever since, following rumors and reports of a young woman traveling alone." He gestured weakly toward the window where the storm continued to rage. "I nearly gave up hope, but then I heard talk in Sweetwater about a new housekeeper at Crooked Creek with honey-brown hair who kept to herself." Clint, who had been watching Willow's reactions carefully, finally spoke. "Sounds like you've been through hell, both of you." He turned to Willow, his expression gentle but unreadable. "What do you want to do?" It was the question that had hovered unspoken between them since the moment she arrived at Crooked Creek. What did she want? For so long, her only desire had been survival, escape, safety. Now, confronted with the possibility that her life in St. Louis might be reclaimed, she found herself torn in a way she'd never anticipated. I don't know," she admitted, looking from James to Clint and back again. "I need time to think." "Of course," James said quickly. "I've spent months searching for you. I can certainly wait while you consider what you want." He swayed again, the ordeal of his journey and exposure to the elements clearly taking its toll. Clint caught him before he could fall. "You need rest," he said firmly. "You can take my room tonight. I'll bunk with the men." As he helped James toward the door that led to his private quarters, Clint glanced back at Willow. "Take all the time you need," he said softly. "Whatever you decide, I just want you to be happy." The raw emotion in those simple words followed Willow as she climbed the stairs to her own room, her mind whirling with revelations and possibilities. She sat by her window, watching the snow fall, until dawn broke over a world transformed by winter's touch. Christmas Day dawned bright and clear, the storm having spent its fury during the night. Willow, who had slept little, rose early to prepare the promised cinnamon rolls and spiced cider. The familiar tasks helped calm her tumultuous thoughts, giving her hands something to do while her heart and mind wrestled with decisions too profound for easy resolution. Clint arrived from the bunkhouse just as she was setting the rolls to rise, stamping snow from his boots at the door. He wore the blue scarf she had knitted, wrapped snugly around his neck. "Merry Christmas," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "How are you feeling?" "Confused," Willow admitted. "Everything I thought I knew has been turned upside down. Again." She busied herself with the cider, avoiding his gaze. "How is Mr. Harrington?" "Sleeping still. Fever broke during the night, which is a good sign. He was lucky we found him when we did." Clint removed his coat and hung it by the door. "The boys are seeing to the horses and will be in for breakfast soon. Thought you might want to know in case you'd rather not face questions just yet." The thoughtfulness of this consideration brought fresh tears to Willow's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, Clint. For taking me in when I had nothing, for never pushing me to explain, for making me feel safe for the first time in so long." Clint crossed the room in 2 long strides, his hands coming to rest gently on her shoulders. "Willow, look at me," he urged softly. She raised her eyes to his, seeing in their clear blue depths the same emotion that had been growing in her own heart over the months of their shared life at Crooked Creek. "I don't know what you'll decide," Clint said, his voice husky with feeling. "And I won't try to influence you. You have a life waiting for you in St. Louis, wealth, position, a man who spent months searching for you. Those are things I can't give you." He paused, his hands tightening slightly on her shoulders. "But I can give you my heart if you want it. It's been yours since the night I found you sleeping against that wall in Sweetwater." Willow's breath caught in her throat. "Clint!" The sound of footsteps interrupted them once again, this time from the direction of Clint's room. They stepped apart as James appeared in the doorway, looking remarkably recovered after his night's rest. He had obviously made use of Clint's razor and comb, presenting a much more kempt appearance than he had the previous evening. "Good morning," he said, his gaze taking in their proximity with evident understanding. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Clint replied with composure that Willow envied. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Harrington. Feeling better, I see." "Much, thank you, and please call me James." He turned to Willow, his expression softening. "Merry Christmas, Willow. I can't tell you what it means to find you safe and well after all this time." Willow managed a small smile. "It's good to see you too, James. There's coffee ready and cinnamon rolls will be done shortly." The 3 of them settled into an awkward tableau, James seated at the table while Willow continued her preparations, and Clint built up the fire. When the Turner brothers and Elijah arrived from the bunkhouse, they brought with them a wave of boisterous Christmas cheer that temporarily dispelled the tension. Breakfast was a lively affair, despite the undercurrents. Willow had little appetite, but took pleasure in seeing her traditional Christmas morning offering enjoyed by the others. James, fitting surprisingly well into the gathering, entertained everyone with tales of Christmas celebrations in St. Louis, while carefully avoiding any mention of Willow's connection to that life. After the meal, when the men had moved to the main room to exchange their own modest gifts, James drew Willow aside. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "About the future, about us." Willow nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of decisions to come. "Not here," she replied. "Later, when things are quieter." The day passed in a blur of activity. The Christmas dinner served earlier than usual, to allow everyone to return to their respective shelters before darkness brought renewed cold. The exchange of gifts, the singing of carols led by David, who proved to have an unexpectedly fine tenor voice. Through it all, Willow found her gaze repeatedly drawn to Clint, who maintained his composure with the dignity she had come to admire. Not once did he attempt to claim her attention or assert any prior right to her consideration. Yet the blue scarf around his neck and the occasional unguarded look in his eyes spoke volumes about his feelings. As the day waned and the men prepared to depart for the bunkhouse, Clint announced that he would accompany them, leaving Willow and James to the privacy of the main house. The significance of this gesture was lost on no one, least of all James, who acknowledged it with a respectful nod. "You don't have to go," Willow found herself saying as Clint donned his coat. "I think I do," he replied gently. "You and Mr. Harrington have much to discuss. Besides," he added with a forced lightness, "Daniel promised to teach me a new card game he learned in Denver. Can't pass up a chance to win back some of my hard-earned wages." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone with the man she had once agreed to marry in what now seemed like another lifetime. "He's in love with you," James observed after a moment of silence. "Can't say I blame him." Willow busied herself clearing the last of the dishes. "Clint has been kind to me, nothing more." "Willow," James's tone made her turn to face him. "We've known each other since we were children. I think I can recognize when a man is in love, even if he's too honorable to say so directly." He moved to help her, gathering plates with the ease of long practice. "Just as I can recognize when a woman's heart is divided." "James, I'm sorry," he raised a hand to stop her apology. "Don't be. When I began searching for you, I wasn't sure what I would find. Whether you would still want the life we had planned together, whether you would still want me." He set the dishes on the sideboard with careful precision. "I came prepared for whatever answer you might give." "And what if my answer isn't the one you hoped for?" Willow asked softly. James smiled, a sad, gentle expression that reminded her of why she had once agreed to be his wife. "Then, I'll wish you every happiness and return to St. Louis knowing that you're safe and well. Your inheritance is secure, Willow. Whether you choose to claim it or not, whether you choose me or not, what's yours is waiting for you. And if I choose to stay here?" The question emerged before she could consider its implications fully. "Then I suspect a certain rancher will be the happiest man in Wyoming territory," James replied with surprising equanimity. "And I'll go back to my law practice with fond memories and the satisfaction of having done right by an old friend." Willow studied his face, searching for signs of the manipulation or deceit she had feared for so long. She found none, only the open honesty that had been James's hallmark since their childhood. "You've changed," she observed. "Nearly losing someone you care about will do that," he acknowledged. "I was too concerned with appearances before, with what others expected. Your disappearance, it made me realize what truly matters." They talked long into the evening, repairing the broken trust between them as they shared the details of their separate journeys over the past year. James described his growing awareness of Richard Crawford's scheme, his horror upon discovering the truth, and his determination to find Willow and set things right. In turn, Willow recounted her flight from St. Louis, the months of fear and uncertainty, and finally her arrival at Crooked Creek Ranch. She spoke of the peace she had found there, the sense of purpose, and the community that had embraced her without question. "And Clint," James asked gently, "what does he mean to you?" Willow gazed into the dying fire, seeing in its embers the reflection of months spent in the quiet companionship of a man whose strength was matched only by his kindness. "He showed me what it means to be truly seen," she said at last. "Not as a banker's daughter or an heiress or even as a housekeeper, but as myself, just Willow." James nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's a rare gift." "Yes," she agreed softly, "it is." The decision, when it came, felt less like a choice and more like a recognition of what her heart had known for months. As the grandfather clock in the corner struck midnight, marking the end of Christmas Day, Willow knew with absolute certainty what path she would follow. "I'm staying," she told James, her voice steady with newfound conviction. "My life is here now, at Crooked Creek." James reached across the space between them to take her hand. "I thought you might say that. I've seen the way you look at him, Willow, the way you come alive in his presence." He squeezed her fingers gently. "Your father would have approved, you know. He always said you had the good sense to recognize a man of character when you met one." Tears sprang to Willow's eyes at the mention of her father. "I wish he could have known Clint." "So do I," James agreed. He released her hand and stood, stretching muscles stiff from hours of conversation. "I should be going. The storm's past, and the road to Sweetwater should be clear enough by morning." "You'll stay tonight, though?" Willow asked, concerned. "It's still bitter cold out there." "I'll stay," he promised, "but I'll leave at first light. Some news is too important to wait." It took a moment for Willow to understand his meaning. "You don't think?" James smiled. "I think a man who gives up his bed to a stranger and spends Christmas night in a bunkhouse to give that stranger time alone with the woman he loves deserves to hear the good news as soon as possible." He bent to kiss her cheek in a brotherly gesture. "Be happy, Willow Crawford. You deserve it more than anyone I know." Morning arrived with the crystalline clarity that follows a winter storm, the sun transforming the snow-covered landscape into a dazzling expanse of white. Willow, who had slept deeply for the first time in months, awoke to the sounds of activity in the yard below her window. Dressing quickly, she hurried downstairs to find James already preparing to depart. His horse, recovered from its own ordeal, stood saddled by the door, while Clint and the Turner brothers loaded supplies for his journey into saddlebags. "You're leaving already?" Willow asked, joining the group in the yard. James turned, smiling at her appearance. "Better to get an early start. The days are short this time of year." He gestured toward the provisions. "Your Mr. Yancy has been kind enough to outfit me for the trip back to Sweetwater." "Least I could do," Clint replied, his tone carefully neutral though his eyes sought Willow's with unspoken questions. Before she could respond, James extended his hand to Clint. "I want to thank you properly, Mr. Yancy. Not just for the supplies or for taking me in during the storm, but for looking after Willow all these months. She couldn't have found a better protector." Clint accepted the handshake, surprise evident on his face. "She's a remarkable woman," he said simply. "It was my privilege." "Indeed she is," James agreed. He turned back to Willow, his expression warm. "I've left the letters and legal documents on the desk inside. Everything you need to claim your inheritance is there, whenever you decide the time is right." He took her hands in his. "Your father would be proud of the woman you've become, Willow. I know I am." With that, he mounted his horse and, with a final salute to the assembled group, rode away toward Sweetwater. Willow watched until he disappeared around the bend in the road, a chapter of her life closing with his departure. When she turned back, she found herself alone with Clint, the Turner brothers having tactfully withdrawn to the barn. He stood watching her, uncertainty written in the set of his shoulders and the careful distance he maintained. "So," he said finally, breaking the silence that had stretched between them, "looks like you've got decisions to make." Willow took a step toward him, then another, closing the physical gap even as her next words bridged the emotional one. "I've already made them," she said softly. "I'm staying, Clint, if you'll have me." The change that came over his face was like the sun breaking through storm clouds, disbelief giving way to dawning joy. "If I'll have you," he repeated incredulously. "Willow, there's nothing in this world I want more but your life in St. Louis, your inheritance, your position mean nothing without happiness," she finished for him. "And my happiness is here, with you, with Crooked Creek." She reached up to touch the blue scarf still wound around his neck. "I've spent the past year running from my past. Now I want to build a future." "Our future." Clint's hands, work roughened but infinitely gentle, came up to frame her face. "I love you, Willow Crawford," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "Have since the moment I found you sleeping against that wall in Sweetwater and brought you that pillow and blanket. Didn't know it then, but I do now." "And I love you, Clint Yancy," she replied, her heart so full it felt it might burst from her chest. "For the man you are, for the home you've made, for seeing me when I was invisible to everyone else." His kiss, when it came, was as inevitable as the sunrise, as natural as breathing. In it, Willow found the answer to every question that had driven her flight from St. Louis, every fear that had haunted her journey, every hope that had sustained her through the darkest nights. Spring came to Wyoming territory with its usual tumult of mud, melting snow, and new life. At Crooked Creek Ranch, the season brought not only calving and planting, but also preparations for a wedding that the entire community had taken as a personal cause for celebration. Willow stood at the window of what was now officially her bedroom, the master bedroom she shared with Clint since their marriage by the circuit preacher in early April. Below, in the yard, the ranch hands were erecting tables for the wedding feast that would follow the ceremony, renewing their vows for the benefit of friends and neighbors who hadn't been present for the original, more modest affair. Having second thoughts. Clint's voice came from the doorway, warm with affection and the security of knowing his place in her heart. Willow turned, drinking in the sight of him dressed in his best clothes, his hair still damp from washing. "Only about letting Sarah convince me we needed a second wedding when we're already quite satisfactorily married," she replied with a smile. Clint crossed the room to take her in his arms, careful not to wrinkle the new dress. She wore a creation of pale green silk that James had sent from St. Louis as a wedding gift. "The way I see it, I'm the luckiest man in the territory. Getting to marry you twice just proves it." She laughed, leaning into his embrace. "I suppose there are advantages to doing things properly this time. The cake, for one, and dancing under the stars. And showing off my beautiful wife to everyone within 50 miles, Clint added, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Although I'm still not sure about all these guests from St. Louis. Bankers and lawyers seem like they'd be more at home in a parlor than a ranch yard." "They'll manage," Willow assured him. "Besides, it's important to me that they see this life I've chosen, that they understand it wasn't a decision made out of fear or necessity, but out of love." The months since Christmas had brought many changes to Crooked Creek Ranch. With James's help, Willow had claimed her inheritance, using a portion of it to expand the ranch's operations while establishing a trust for the remaining funds. Clint, initially uncomfortable with his wife's wealth, had come to appreciate what it meant for their future and for the community they were building around them. The ranch house had expanded as well, with a new wing added to accommodate the children they hoped would eventually fill its rooms. Sarah and Elijah had moved into a larger cabin nearer the main house, while the Turner brothers continued to occupy the bunkhouse along with several new hands hired to manage the growing herd. "Mrs. Yancy," Clint murmured against her hair, "have I told you today how much I love you?" Willow tilted her face up to his. "Only twice. You're falling behind schedule." His chuckle rumbled through his chest. "Can't have that." He kissed her properly then, his arms tightening around her with a possessiveness that never failed to make her heart race. "I love you, Willow Yancy. More today than yesterday, and not as much as I will tomorrow." "That's better," she whispered when they finally parted. "And I love you, Clint Yancy, for bringing me a pillow and blanket when I had nothing and for giving me a home when I had nowhere." Below, the sounds of arriving guests signaled that it was time to join the celebration. Hand in hand, they descended the stairs to the yard where friends old and new awaited them. As the setting sun bathed the ranch in golden light, Clint and Willow Yancy renewed the promises they had already made in their hearts long before either had found the courage to speak them aloud. And if anyone noticed that the bride wore a blue scarf around her bouquet, or that the groom kept a small wooden box in his pocket containing a strand of her hair, they smiled knowingly at the private tokens of a love that had begun on a cold night with a simple act of kindness, a pillow, and a blanket for a woman sleeping against a wall. 5 years later, Willow sat on the front porch of Crooked Creek Ranch, watching her twin daughters chase butterflies in the summer sunshine. At 3 years old, Emma and Elizabeth Yancy were the image of their mother, with honey-brown hair and quick smiles, though they had inherited their father's sky-blue eyes and stubborn determination. "Don't go too far," she called as the girls ventured toward the edge of the yard. Beside her, in a cradle that Clint had crafted with his own hands, their 6-month-old son Robert slept peacefully, untroubled by his sister's squeals of delight. The ranch had prospered beyond anyone's expectations. What had once been a struggling operation was now one of the most successful in the territory, with improved breeding stock, expanded grazing lands, and a reputation for fair dealing that brought buyers from as far away as Chicago. Daniel Turner, now 24 and married to the schoolteacher from Sweetwater, managed a second herd on adjacent land that Clint and Willow had helped him purchase. His brother David had gone east to study veterinary medicine, returning each summer to care for the livestock and share the latest scientific advancements with eager ranchers throughout the region. Sarah and Elijah had welcomed 2 more children of their own, creating a small community of young families that brought new life and energy to Crooked Creek. The original bunkhouse had been replaced by a larger structure, and a small schoolhouse stood near the main road, established with funds from Willow's inheritance, and staffed by a teacher whose salary she quietly subsidized. The sound of hoofbeats announced Clint's return from his morning ride around the property. Willow's heart still quickened at the sight of him, tall and straight in the saddle, his face weathered by years in the Wyoming sun, but as handsome to her as the day he'd first brought her that pillow and blanket. "Papa." The twins cried in unison, abandoning their butterflies to rush toward their father as he dismounted. Clint scooped them up, one in each arm, and carried them back to the porch. "Been behaving for your mama?" he asked, depositing them carefully beside Willow. "Angels, as always," Willow replied with a wry smile that acknowledged the spirited nature of their daughters. Clint leaned down to kiss her, then peered into the cradle at their sleeping son. "And how's the little man today?" "Growing stronger by the hour, just like his father," Willow said, reaching up to touch his cheek. Even after 5 years of marriage, she sometimes needed the tangible reassurance of his presence, the solid reality of the life they had built together. Clint caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm, understanding as always the unspoken emotions behind the gesture. "Got a letter from James in today's Post," he said, settling into the chair beside her. "Says he's considering running for state office back in Missouri." "He'd make an excellent legislator," Willow observed. Though the romantic attachment between them had long since faded into friendship, she maintained a regular correspondence with James, who had married a widow with 2 young sons the previous year. "Also says he might bring his family for a visit next summer," Clint continued, pulling the twins onto his lap as they clamored for his attention. "Wants his boys to see what a real ranch looks like. We'll have to make sure it lives up to their expectations," Willow laughed. "Perhaps by then, we can convince Daniel to offer riding lessons. Those city boys will need to learn from an expert." As the conversation flowed easily between them, punctuated by the girl's innocent observations and questions, Willow was struck anew by the perfection of this life she had chosen. The wealth and position she had left behind in St. Louis paled in comparison to the riches of family, community, and purpose she had found at Crooked Creek. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, and the day's work complete, Clint and Willow sat together on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky. His arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest, they enjoyed a moment of peaceful communion that needed no words to express its depth. "Happy?" Clint asked finally, his voice a low rumble beneath her ear. Willow tilted her face up to his, smiling in the gathering darkness. "Completely," she assured him. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible," he replied, tightening his arm around her. "Sometimes I wake up in the night and watch you sleeping beside me, just to make sure you're real and not some dream I've conjured up." "I'm real," Willow said softly, "and I'm not going anywhere. This is where I belong, where we belong." As if to underscore her words, a shooting star blazed across the night sky, leaving a trail of light that lingered in their vision like a blessing on the life they had created together, a life that had begun with a simple act of kindness on a cold night in Sweetwater, when a weary traveler slept sitting up against a wall and a compassionate cowboy brought a pillow and blanket. In that moment of celestial benediction, surrounded by the home they had built and the love they had nurtured, Clint and Willow Yancy knew that they had found in each other not just a partner for life's journey, but a true haven for their hearts, a place where they would always belong, come what may. And in the years that followed, as their children grew and the ranch prospered under their careful stewardship, they would often look back on that fateful night as the first chapter in a story more beautiful than either could have imagined, a story of love found in the most unexpected circumstances, of trust built over shared meals and quiet conversations, of a life made rich not by wealth or position, but by the precious gift of finding home in another's heart.